Yeah, so I think we were trying to grow too fast. We saw the numbers, we saw the revenue, and that's one of the things that we now know, that the revenue doesn't really mean much if you're not making any. If you're losing, that's actually worse. Hello, everyone. In this podcast, we're going to be talking about our first actual business venture, which was Form Apparel, which is an online e-commerce, you could say discount retailer. Kind of like we were selling a lot of liquidated clothing. And so in this one, we're pretty much going to talk about our failures and pretty much what not to do. And so I think this is going to be a good one for sure. And especially if you're in that position or you see you're headed towards that position, I think this is going to be a good podcast of what not to do.
And just to give a little context, I know the first year in that business, we did 30,000 and then we scaled it up to 6 figures, which the second year we did 170,000. So I guess my first question is, how did the idea come to be?
Well, I think just like most ideas, they come from either our experience, and in this case, it's been our previous job. Well, my previous job, which I worked at this place. It was online. You can find them as retail fashion outlet. And so what they pretty much did is they bought a lot of liquidated or overstock products from either manufacturers, retailers. And so they bought it they heavily discounted. And so what they did is, they used to bring them into their warehouse. And then we used to, just prep them, clean them. Well, not clean them, but just ready them, hang them, and then get ready to be listed, take pictures of. And that's where we got the main idea from. So just pretty much buying either overstock liquidated stuff and selling it online, which I think there was, back then at least, there's a big market, because I know from what I've seen, at least in like their, like you could say their sales volume, they've gone down. And so I know back then it was pretty big. I know they got into like the 8 figures, in the mid 8 figures, so they were killing it back then. I don't know about now, but I could tell just by the reviews that they went down. And so that's pretty much that's where we got the idea from. Of not just selling clothing, but liquidated in general, because we bought clothing, we bought electronics, we bought in toys, we got in all sorts of stuff, and we sold it online. And so we have a good amount of experience.
That's one of the reasons why we started that business, is because we kind of had like an idea of a already successful business model. So then my question is, why did we pursue it? I know there's different businesses we could have done. So what's one of the reasons why we pursued it?
Yeah, and I think when we started, that was after I think we left World Financial Group.
Yeah.
Which is another topic for another podcast. But I know we were probably thinking of other ideas to do, because I know we never wanted to, like, not that we didn't want to work for someone. It's just that I think in the immediate, because we had no college degree, and back then our mentality was different. We had no college degree. We really had nothing
going for us. Yeah.
We thought business was really the only way to make it.
Yep.
And so I know, the job was temporary to make money, and then we wanted to do other stuff. But and then I just blanked out. What was the question?
So why did we pursue it, knowing there was other opportunities or other vehicles to make money?
Yeah, and then pretty much just the main reason why we pursued it is because we saw that, for one, companies can actually become successful doing that. And then the other one, it was a kind of a low barrier to entry. Yep. So pretty much anyone could, buy liquidated stuff. There's a lot of websites like liquidation.com, Bstock, Supply. There's a lot of those websites that you could actually just make an account and buy from them. And so it was pretty low barrier to entry, and we saw that companies could actually become successful. And I think that's the main reason why we chose to pursue that.
Yeah, and I remember before that, we kind of had a different idea. I know we wanted to go into clothing because that's what pretty much everyone was doing. I remember we went to Starbucks on Central and Slauson.
Yeah.
And I remember we were thinking of ideas of how to start a business. And I remember we thought of kind of selling like the same kind of like business model on eBay. But we thought of selling shirts. Remember? So we thought of like, okay, we're going to go to Alibaba. We're going to place an order to manufacture shirts, and, we're going to sell them. And we were kind of doing the math there and there on Starbucks. And we soon realized that it was going to be quite a bit of capital.
Yeah.
I know a lot of the times Alibaba manufacturers or manufacturers in general have a minimum order quantity, meaning that you kind of have to, an example, buy 100 shirts, 200 shirts, or 300 shirts to be able to order from them. So it's kind of like we realized we were going to have to kind of like put up quite a bit of capital. So then that's why, we went, I think that's when we went all in on the liquidation, because like one of the ways we got started into the liquidation is we started going through Goodwill, right?
Yeah, and so that was because we didn't have a lot of money back then, and we couldn't we couldn't do our first idea, which is pretty much buying like in bulk, like clothing, and then also pallets themselves were not cheap. I think, or at least the type of pallets we wanted to pursue were around 2,000, and so I think the easiest thing, and also watching a lot of YouTube, there was a lot of YouTubers like hustlers, side hustlers that used to go to Goodwill and buy just the most random, not random, but there's a lot of people, there's a lot of clothes that people donate that is really good, and so they used to go Goodwill, go hunting for like the deals, and yeah, just buying it for $2-3 and then selling it online for $50-$60, which I think is still a good and viable business model if you want to make some side money. But that's how we started, because we just had no money to purchase any significant inventory.
Yeah, and when we started, I know we used to go specifically on the days and times that there was specials. I know, like, at one point we bought everything at $1, so like a jacket, pants, a nice sweater or something, everything was at $1, and that allowed us to make good margins on everything else. But just to keep moving forward, what were some of the expectations going into business? I know we'd never done this before, so like, I guess I would say, what are the expectations we had going into starting the business?
I think just trying to think back of our mentality back then, I think it was just trying to make enough money. Like, and what I mean by that is just more than our jobs, but just, I don't think, I mean, obviously everyone wants to grow a huge company. Well, I don't know if that's the case, but I think our mentality, we want to grow a huge company, but I think at that moment was just to make enough to surpass our jobs and become our own business owners. And then I think at that point we would figure out what it is that we actually wanted to do. So our expectations, I think back then, was just to quit our jobs.
Yeah.
If I try to remember our mentality back then, I think it was just let's make enough to kind of like be doing this full time.
How do we start?
Yeah, and I think we started through Goodwill, buying like 1 item, 2 items, 3 items at a time, like 10, 15, $20. And so it wasn't a lot of money. And so we started that way. And we really just had an apartment that, we didn't have money even to rent a storage unit or anything like that. And so we started off our parents. I remember we used to buy Goodwill clothing. We used to get a bunch of Goodwill bags, and then we used to bring them home, list them, and, and that's pretty much how we got started. And then afterwards, I think it was a lot of clothing, because our apartment back then was pretty small, like 300-400 square feet, so it was extremely small.
Yeah.
And but the cost of goods wasn't a lot. It was only a few dollars, and then the sales relative to the cost of goods were pretty high. Like we bought something for like $3, $4, $5. Let's say even $10. We used to sell them for like $40-$50. And I think it also comes from the experience that I had at working at my previous job, that I had an understanding of the brands that sold, and I also watched a lot of YouTube. That I think helped more than anything.
Yep.
And so that's how we started. And then at some point, I think the clothing was too much. And then you remember what happened after?
Yeah, I remember the easiest solution. I know we were kind of looking into warehouses or like locations to work from, but I think one of the easiest solutions at the moment we could come up with was getting a storage unit.
Yeah.
That way, we would work from home. We would list, take the pictures at home, and then once everything was listed, we would store them at the storage place. Because I know the storage place was only charging like $100, or like it wasn't too much. And depending on the size of the storage you got, determine the price. So it was like, for us, since we were starting, it was like a good option because we weren't paying too much, and we had the extra space. So I know that's how we started. We kept at it after a few months. We kept at it for a few months, and then after that, I know we were growing little and little, and then it was kind of like having to go back and forth every time, because I know we used to buy the inventory. So we used to buy the inventory, we used to take it home, list it, make sure everything was good, and then once it was listed, we would package it, in a bag, and then put it at the storage unit. And then once it's sold, we would have to go back to the storage unit, and we would have to go back home and ship it. So I know we kept that up for a few weeks, but then we realized it was kind of like a headache going back and forth. It was like 2 or 3 trips every day. And, like as the business grew little by little, we had a little bit extra money. And, with the money from our jobs, we had a little bit of cash on hand. So after that, we decided, maybe it's time to get a location. So How did that happen?
Yeah, and so at that point we pretty much we didn't know back then, how to even approach it. And so I think as we were, driving back and forth towards the storage unit into our apartment, we saw that there was a for lease on the building. Remember?
Yeah. Yep.
And I forgot it was you or me who called. I think it was you. I forgot who called, but pretty much we called, and the good thing is that they had a small unit.
Yep.
It was only like 500 square feet, so it was more than perfect for us. And I think the rent back then was around also on the $500-600 around.
It was 500.
It was pretty much $1 a square foot. And so we called. We qualified and we rented it. And then I think that's where, having that location, I think that also it's also it was a 1 year commitment. 1 year.
Yeah, it was a 1 year. Yep.
So pretty much, this pretty much, solidified that, we're in business kind of thing. Because even if we don't sell, we're still gonna have to pay the rent. And so that was our first location. And I think at that point was when we also, I think, formed our company, our LLC around that point. And then we just had everything set. And then and I think also at that point we started we had enough money to buy pallets.
Right.
And so because Goodwill, I mean, you can make good money.
Yes.
But isn't like scalable, you could say. There's only one or two of you that can actually go out and look for stuff. And so that limits you to the amount of things that you can actually buy and sell. And so pallets is a little bit more scalable. Mm-hmm. But scalable. And so I think that's when we bought our first pallets.
Yeah, I remember it was through B-Stock, right?
Yeah, it was through B-Stock.
B-Stock.
And then that pallet did really good, because we didn't. Also at that point, I think we didn't know fully exactly what we were doing. Mm-hmm. But that pallet or pallets did really well. And then I think at some point we just started buying. We just made an account with Macy's Liquidation.
Yep.
And then we bought from them. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know if you remember that our first pallets, I think there was 3 pallets that we bought.
I don't remember exactly like that time, it wasn't quite a while. I know it was like 2016. But I do remember it was a few pallets that came, and they were good materials, no? Yeah,
they were good. Because when we pretty much sold them out pretty quick. I remember one of them, I think, had a bunch of Levi's jeans.
Okay.
Which they sold really quick, Levi's jeans. Even if used, and they still almost at... Well, back then, I don't know how it is now. They sold almost at full price used. And I think that gave us the confidence to actually go ahead and say, and I think at that point we also transitioned to the larger unit, which, we got lucky, but we transitioned to the larger unit. Yep. And I think at that point, since our pallets had been doing well, I think we were like, you know what? This actually is working. Let's go like even more all in. And I think that's at the point where we were like, we might want to get a loan.
Yeah, but just a quick thing. I know with the moving to the other unit, we were still paying the same rent. Yeah. The reason why is because the landlord wanted to... Well, there was a new tenant who moved in next to us, next door, and he wanted our unit. Mm-hmm. And so what the landlord did is he accommodated us to a bigger unit at the same price. So that kind of like helped us a lot, because we were able to expand while still having the same expense of the rent, which was $500. So that allowed us to, maintain our costs down. So that helped us a lot. Yeah. And I know, like you mentioned, that after that we were kind of like serious. The pallets we had bought previously were doing good. So we decided, we kind of told ourselves it was kind of time to take it to the next level, like you mentioned. And I know one of the ways we decided to take it to the next level is by buying more pallets. But because we didn't have like as much money to buy the pallets, I know one of the things we did is I got a personal loan, correct?
Yeah. And then at that point, we'd had also, I think both of us had quit our job because the pallets were doing so good. The rent was low. Before we transitioned to the other unit, both of us had quit our jobs. Mm-hmm. And so, but then at that point, the business was, doing pretty well. Yep. And so that's when, I think you were the first. Was it you or me that got
I think it was you.
That got the loan first, huh?
No, I got the loan first.
You got the loan first.
I got the loan first. And it was $18,000, and then we used that $18,000 to buy really good like items on through Macy's Pallet Liquidation. And I know with Macy's Pallet Liquidation, we kind of had a manifest before we bought the pallets. I know they were giving manifests of what's included, like the retail value, the unities, and so we were kind of like trying to find good deals. So there was 2 ways we could buy. We could buy directly the pallets, or we could do bidding. So I know we did a lot of those, and using that $18,000, we bought quite a bit of pallets, right?
Yeah.
And then those, like, little by little, those pallets were doing good. So that's basically all we were doing. We were rinsing and repeating. We were buying pallets. We were selling. The excess amount of money we would get from, selling the items, we would reinvest it and buy more pallets. And so we would be doing that for quite a bit of time until our lease ended.
Yeah, and so I think also you got the loan, 18,000. I think around that time, same time, I got the loan too. It's pretty much around the same amount. And so we both had loans, and so we had like $30,000 in loans.
18 and 18.
So yeah, over 30, 35, 36.
Yep.
So we had quite a bit of loans, but also I think we got lucky not lucky, because we were actually doing our due diligence, but we got good inventory, and so things were going good. And so yeah, and then that's when you said that that's when we saw, like taking it to the next level. And I think that's when we started looking for the other warehouse.
Yeah. And just, something to keep in mind, it was our first business. We didn't have all the experience in the world. So we thought, like, we just got to keep on buying good inventory, selling it, and we're just going to continue to grow. So keeping that in mind, I know we decided to look for another location because the location we were at was 1,300 square feet. And it was pretty much filled up. It was pretty much...
Or at least that's what we thought.
Or at least that's what we thought. We weren't the most efficient at the time. So after that, we started looking for another warehouse. And I know we were looking on Craigslist, and we ended up finding a location. It was a standalone building in Inglewood, which was like roughly 2,700 square feet. We went to the location. We took a look at it, and, it was pretty cool. It was like it had its own kitchen. It had like 2 bathrooms. It had it was I don't want to say big, but it had like a kind of like a storage unit, like a garage, which was like 500 square feet, which was what we had, and it could be used for storage. So it was a pretty good location.
I would say, especially at our size of our business, it was doubling the size. It had like a kitchen. It had pretty much everything. Yeah, it was definitely like a step up, you could say.
Yeah, and so we ended up getting the unit for, it was like, what was it, $2,000?
Like 27, like I think it was $2,400. So it was pretty much just under $1 square foot.
Okay, so we got the warehouse, and then what happened, as time progressed?
Yeah, and so so pretty much our rent quadrupled, or pretty much quadrupled. And so also another thing to keep in, like, just to know, is to look at your numbers.
Yep.
And so I think also back then, one of the things that why we failed in that business is because we weren't keeping a good eye on the numbers. And so that definitely prevented us from seeing the actual health of the business, because as time progressed, sales were high, the sales were increasing.
Yep.
But we didn't see that our expenses were increasing too, because at that point was the first time that we hired someone.
Yeah, we've hired our first worker.
Yeah, and so I mean, we saw the business starting to grow, the numbers starting to grow, but we didn't see the expenses, the shipping from the pallets, the actual cost of goods, the inventory that wasn't selling. Because also at that point, we got another loan, I think, Cabbage. I don't know if you remember.
I remember. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think we were trying to grow too fast. We saw the numbers, we saw the revenue, and that's one of the things that we now know, that the revenue doesn't really mean much if you're not making any. If you're losing, that's actually worse.
Yep.
So we that's what we're looking at, revenue. It's always going up. This month went up, but we didn't see the expenses going up. We didn't see that the rent quadrupled. We didn't see that we hired someone. We didn't see that we had other expenses, insurance, internet.
Yep.
And so, but I think back then, as long as we saw the revenue going up, we were like, we're good. Yep. Yeah, but then I think, we just kept doing that for a few months. And then as time progressed, though, I think we were buying pallets, and some of those pallets turned out that they weren't that best sellers. They weren't good inventory, you could say.
No, and I think with those pallets, one of the reasons why we bought them was because they had large quantity of items. I know during that time we started selling women's clothing, and so like they were decent. They were selling pretty good, but the thing with that is that they have a lot of high returns, especially with women's clothing. And so like we were buying, we had a lot of inventory that wasn't selling. We had a lot of returns. We weren't keeping track of our expenses as we should have. And so little by little, we were kind of like just barely making it. We were, if not even, sometimes we were negative.
Yeah.
And so we, like how you mentioned, we took out loans, and some of the loans we were using kind of like just to maintain. So even though our second year we made 170,000, it wasn't really 170,000. If anything, we were at a loss because of the loans. We still had to pay the loans. So I know at the time we were close to. I know we still had the 18 and 18 loans.
Yeah.
And I know we had the cabbage. Which, do you remember how much it was?
Like the total loan was around 1,000.
1,000.
I mean, my bad, 10,000.
Okay.
Around there that we got it. And so yeah, and the monthly payments on our Discover loans, and they were personal loans, so
yeah,
they weren't business loans.
No.
And so they were like 450
Mhm.
bucks, 450 to 500 bucks. And then so that was like almost $1,000 in loan payments that we had to make a month. Cabbage, it was only a 12-year, because for the personal loans it was like I think 5 years.
Okay.
And then the cabbage we had to pay it in a year. So I think the payments were around $1,000 a month.
Yeah.
So pretty much $2,000 months paying in loans.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's what kind of like we try to grow too fast.
Yeah.
Because we saw things going good, and so we try to grow too fast. We didn't take the time to learn actual like the operations, the inventory, test inventory.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think just we try to grow too fast.
Yep.
And I think that's kind of what got us, you could say, because once we started buying that bad inventory, you could say.
Yep.
That's when we had to take out cabbage loans to pay off some loans. And then and so I think that's when you could see the free fall, because then I think at that point, like I don't know if you remember that point.
Yeah, it was a cycle. I know we had to take care of all the business expenses, but on top of that we had to pay the loans. And I know like there was times when we didn't have enough money to pay back the loans, so we would have to get another loan to pay off the loans. So it was just a cycle. And I know like during that time with the loans, one of the loans was a line of credit. So it's like we had a total amount, for example, like 20,000, 30,000, and we would be taking out lines of credits for like 1,000, 2,000 just to be able to cover the other monthly expenses for the loans.
Yeah, and I remember it was cabbage.
Yeah,
it was we had a line of credit, and so we had to pay like $1,000 payment. So off that, we had to pay cabbage. So we borrowed from cabbage to pay cabbage.
Yep.
And so yeah, it was pretty much a cycle. Yeah, and so I remember that time vividly, because then also, like our landlord.
Yeah.
He had passed away.
Yep.
And so I think his family members took over. But then I think at that point we knew that we kind of had to let go of our employee that we hired. And I think at that point we kind of knew, like, man, dude, we can't keep up with like the expenses, payments, and all that, especially as revenue isn't as strong as before. And so we knew we kind of had to do something. And so I know at that point, I think we were pretty much stretched really thin.
Yep.
And I think I forgot how exactly we came to the decision, but I think one of us had to get a job.
Yeah, I remember that. But I think before we let go of our worker, before we decided to get like the job, I know we kind of decided, like, do we want to continue pursuing this business model? Like, do we want to, because like if we wanted to, we could have, like kind of like grind it and actually like build it up even bigger, and maybe even become profitable and whatnot. But it's kind of like we decided, like, is this something we want to pursue? Is, clothing something we want to do? Like, do we see, like, I think more than anything, do we see if we could get it to like a huge stage, like knowing the competition, knowing that, the entry level, the barrier to entry, knowing that anyone could do it and whatnot. And we kind of decided just to scale back quite a bit. And, that's when we, had to let go of our worker. That's when we first got, that's when we had to find another job. And I know the first person that, went to look for a job was myself. Yeah. Because I know, like, you were more experienced in, like, listing the stuff. So I know you were still doing that.
Yeah.
We still had some pallets that we hadn't listed. So, like, while you listed, I went to, to look for another job. And I think one of the reasons why we got the job was to be able to have extra income that was in the business. Because at that time, even though we were making, like, a certain amount of revenue, we were breaking even. So it was just extra income.
Yeah. And so I remember that. So you had to get the job, and then I had to list.
Yep.
And then also, but we knew we couldn't pay the rent because that was $2,400 a month. And so luckily the landlords were like really, really nice.
Yep.
And so we told them kind of about our situation. You know what? Like, I think at some point we're not going to be able to pay rent. And so we were able to get off of our lease. And so, yeah, we got off of our lease. we had some inventory, so I know we had to get a storage unit.
Yeah.
You remember? And
Yep.
so we pretty much got out of our lease, and we were still selling. It's just that we were selling kind of like back to kind of like how we started with the, what do you call that? The storage unit.
Yeah. And I remember because we didn't have the warehouse rent anymore, that was $2,400 a month. We had extra to pay back the loans, just to pay the expenses. And at that time, we stopped buying pallets completely. We were just selling off whatever we had, and, like, we would use the income that I was bringing in from the job. And, we kept that up for quite a bit. Like, I know you kept it up, going to the storage unit, going back and forth. And I remember that's something we didn't want to tell our parents.
Yeah.
And the reason why we didn't decide to tell them is because we didn't want to worry them.
Yep.
I know, like, for our parents, especially my mom, like, one of the things she wanted us to do is go to college, become a doctor, become a lawyer, basically have a career, going to college and having a career. And, like, we didn't want to worry them, like, hey, we have all these loans, our business isn't doing good. So we just kept it to ourselves. And we would tell them, oh, no, it's just because we're doing something different.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things we told them. And, like I mentioned, you were just going back and forth from the storage unit to the house listing. And we kept that up for a while.
Yeah. And so, it was for a while because... Yeah, we were selling the clothing, and then there was some things here and there. For example, like I remember we bought an electronic pallet.
Yeah.
Where there was like, it was a good one. I mean, it sold pretty quick. It had a bunch of like Xbox controllers. It had good stuff. It had actually really good stuff.
Yep.
And so we continued that for a bit.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, dude, there was a lot of lessons that we learned from that business. And so one of the things that I'm really thankful for is that we actually failed.
Yep.
Because let's say at this stage where we're running a it's still a small business, but we have, I think, 7 employees.
Yep.
And we have like large commitments.
Mm-hmm.
Luckily we don't have much of any debt.
No.
And we don't have any debt, and so I am really glad that we failed at a smaller scale where we can actually get jobs, and that income from that jobs could actually pay back the loans. So I'm really glad that we failed back then. So then, because we learned what not to do. And one of the main lessons for me is, if you have to get a loan to pay off a loan, that's at the point where I think the business either has failed or is pretty much on the brink of failing. Another one is, yes, don't grow too fast. Speed is good. That's one of the things I want to emphasize. Speed and growing is good, but I think when it comes to like, if it gets to the point where you want to grow past like your ability to do so, if that makes any sense, I think it's also, not, at least from our experience, especially because we didn't have a lot of skills back then.
Yep.
So that's why I think it kind of like the growth that we wanted to have, we weren't able to because just of our lack of skills.
And I think another one is kind of being honest with yourself. I know we wanted to grow the business. Like we had seen kind of like the pattern before we even thought of quitting. We saw like, okay, so we're getting the loans to buy inventory, and we're also getting loans to pay back the loans. So it's kind of like we saw that coming. It was kind of like red flags, but we just decided to push through. So you kind of had to be honest with yourself, and you kind of had to look at your business, and and you had to tell yourself, okay, my business is not doing so well, so let's see how I could make it better. Or it's to the point where like it just makes sense to sell off everything and like be at a loss. So you kind of do have to be honest with yourself.
Yeah, because then I think being honest with ourselves that wasn't the business model that we wanted to actually like do or grow.
No.
So yeah, there was quite a bit of lessons learned. And so one of the things that I am thankful for is that we failed at that stage, because I wouldn't want to fail right now.
Yeah.
Because we wouldn't be able to get off of our commitments. A $10,000 a month warehouse lease, employees, having to let go of employees. There's some commitments that we do have, and so I am definitely glad that we failed back then, because it definitely taught us a lot. And so if there's anything, like, I think you definitely learn through experience.
You do.
But if you could learn from other people's mistakes and experience, I think that's a lot smarter and quicker way to get to where you want to go.
Right.
Because we kind of would have like actually like, because we kind of knew like we had some knowledge, but if we actually follow like some of the, not just recommendations, but some advice from people that we probably seen online, we probably wouldn't have gone to the stage of, you could say, failure that we did running that business.
So I know we learned through our mistakes, what not to do. So like what are some of the positive, you could say, lessons, or what are some of the positive traits we got from failing our business?
There were some. I would preface it by saying I think we learned more what not to do than what to do.
Yeah.
Which is actually like a lot, sometimes better than knowing what to do.
Mm-hmm.
But some of the things that we learned, I think, to do would be to actually keep track of our numbers.
Yeah.
I think that was the main, well, at least for me, from my perspective, that was the main lesson, to actually keep track of your numbers, keep good at counting.
Yep.
And actually like know your numbers, because you could think you're doing well, but in reality, like, you could be doing bad. So that's the main thing that I learned, that I think everyone needs to actually do. Mm-hmm. Especially when you have like inventory and stuff like that.
Yep.
It's more capital intensive than a service-based business. So for example, if you're detailing, window tinting, PPF, if you have inventory, that's something that you want to keep track of. And especially if you have a location, that's something else, because that's not only like money, that's a commitment.
Yep.
So like, I think, I don't know exactly what happens if you break a lease, but I don't know if it affects your credit or anything, but
yeah. And one of the things at least that I got out of this is have some reserve, like some cash reserve in your bank account. Because I know before we used to go like our bank account, everything we used to have, we used to buy inventory. And that goes back to like scaling quick. But now it's kind of like we have a little bit of reserves to kind of like, okay, if the business is bad 1 month, at least we have reserves. So it's kind of like, yes, we are trying to grow fast, but at the same time, we're not sacrificing those reserves in case, like the economy goes bad, as like it did in 2022, especially for the automotive industry. So now we know not to overstretch ourselves. We know to have reserves. We know to be just more diligent with the numbers, like Juan mentioned. And yeah, that's just one of the things. Basically, look at your numbers. One of the last questions I have, I know when you're an entrepreneur, you want to work for yourself. You want to start a business. You want to start a side hustle. A lot of the times we don't have the experience. So it kind of makes sense that, and it's going to happen that we're going to fail. Mm-hmm. Our side hustle, our business. So what advice would you give entrepreneurs starting when it comes to failure?
Yeah, so for me, look at failure as just a learning experience. Okay. It's not a failure. Like, it's only a failure if you actually give up and quit. Mm. It's actually a failure. But see failure or that little failure as a learning experience, as what it is that you need to do and what it is that you shouldn't do. And look at failure as just a learning experience. And you only fail if you actually give up and quit.
Yeah.
At that point, then it is a failure. Because for us, pretty much we were failing for 10 years.
Yeah, pretty much.
And so if we gave up at our first, second, third, fourth, fifth failure, we would actually be, failures, at least in business or in entrepreneurship. But now, we would actually be failures. And so, just if you actually want it, do not give up, in a sense. And I don't want to be cliche, but see failure as just a learning experience. Mm-hmm. And then on your end, because I know a lot of people maybe have failed. So how do you see failure?
I think it's just a part of life. I know in anything new we do, we're always going to be bad at it. So because we don't have all the answers in the beginning, we kind of have to go through all the experience. We have to go through all the motions to learn and to get all that experience. But, as we go, we're going to fail. When we start our business, maybe we don't know how to market. Maybe we don't know how to sell. Maybe we don't know like the competition. We don't know, we have so many variables that we don't know that it's almost a given we're going to fail. But like you mentioned, I think more than anything, it's just learning, how you said. Learning and actually taking those lessons you learned and trying not to repeat them. Because it doesn't matter if you fail and then there's a lesson to be learned, but you don't learn it, and then you go ahead and repeat the same thing. It's kind of like it's just going to keep happening. So I think as time progresses, you learn more. Those failures are going to get less and less. And then those failures are not going to be as hard. Because I think to this day, we still kind of make a lot of mistakes. Mm-hmm. And you could consider those failures. I know a lot of the things we used to do early on in our current business, we were coming out with new products. We knew they weren't going to sell. Technically, those were failures. So it's kind of we're still making failures to this day. Or we're still failing to this day. But I think it's just learning from those mistakes, learning from those failures. Yeah, with that, this was just a quick podcast of, our first business and how we failed, all the lessons we learned of what not to do and what to do. And yeah, let me know if you guys have failed before and, what are some of the lessons you learned. But with that, thank you guys for watching. My name is Alexis.
And my name is Juan.
And we'll see you on the next podcast.